Hello, welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Damien. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week, we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Damien, you were up this week.
Yes, sir.
What do you bring to the table today?
Well, I'm excited because I have brought our May book to the table. Yes, for us to talk about. That book is called No Cop City, No Cop World, Lessons from the Movement. And it was edited by Kamau Franklin, Micah Herskind, and Mariah Parker, and published just about a year ago by our friends at Haymarket Books. And what a great book this was. It's made up of a really rich collection of essays, letters, poems from various organizers, abolitionists, scholars, and activists who have been part of the Stop Cop City movement in some way, shape, or form. The folks featured in this book explore the history, the tactics, the strategies, the impact, the struggles, certainly the challenges, and the future of the Stop Cop City movement, which has truly been an intersectional movement, right? And the book really hits this home. What I mean by that is what's happening with this movement in Atlanta sits at this incredible intersection of social and racial justice, environmental justice, climate justice, indigenous justice, and economic justice, which has brought together a truly multiracial, multifaceted coalition that's involved and doing the work and involved in this movement. And what's really great about this book is that the lessons that are shared in it are so profound and so applicable to all of our movements and our work and our fights for justice, both here in the United States, but also abroad. And so there's a lot to take from this book, but just to set some context in case any of our listeners are unfamiliar, the Stop Cop City movement is a response to the city of Atlanta's proposal to build a 381-acre police training and militarization facility in the heart of the Weelaunee Forest, located just outside of Atlanta, which is slated to cost somewhere around $120 million. And the site of that proposed facility is in a majority Black working class area that was once home to the Muskogee Nation, which, hopefully it's clear through that context how and why Stop Cop City is an intersectional movement, I should say. But that's enough for me. There's so much to talk about in this book, so many incredible chapters. I know you said last week, how are we going to talk about this? Because the essays are so great, but there's just a lot there. But yeah, where do you want to start?
I thought there were so many lessons in this book. As you said, people are talking about so many different things. The breadth of this book is the biggest part of the success of it in my mind, because there are people talking about all those different aspects that you named across the project of trying to stop Cop City, from occupying the forest to the electoral work to people who are speaking at city council meetings and the saboteurs who are breaking machines. And all of that work is part of the story of Stop Cop City. So I'm glad that so much of it is reflected and represented here.
Yeah.
And I think that as we talk about frequently on the podcast, there's an important internationalist perspective that is one of the themes of the book. So the editors Kamau, Micah, and Mariah, as you mentioned, talk in the introduction about how, quote, expanding police infrastructure to control the masses is certainly not limited to the United States. Israel, for example, is home to the Urban Warfare Training Center, known by the soldiers who train there as Mini Gaza, a $45 million, 60-acre facility that is meant to simulate the urban environments in which Israel's soldiers often operate. Beyond urban warfare training to combat so-called terrorism, note that both Palestinian freedom fighters and Stop Cop City protesters have been called terrorists. The link between Israel and Georgia is even deeper, as the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange Program has operated since the 1990s as an exchange between Israeli and Georgia police forces. So clear internationalist perspective there about how all of this stuff is tied together. And it points later on, there are discussions about the connection between violence against protesters in South America and the repression of activists in Atlanta, And so we see again the way that so many of these conditions that we're living in are reflected across the world through these different kinds of global modes of control.
Yeah. Well, and it's fascinating to have witnessed and learned more about our connected struggles in the book in this way. But as you also say, the connected modes of oppression were really made clear to me in this book as it relates to Stop Cop City. So yeah, that's a really great point. One of the essays that I feel like I learned a lot from was called Boss Terror: How the Capital of the South Funded Cop City. And it was actually written by Mariah Parker, one of the editors. And the essay opens by saying, quote, "In times of mass uprising, the powerful band together, and not just politically, but financially." And I was like, well, I'm hooked. Where are we going? Those powerful words are followed by Mariah offering us an incredible glimpse into Atlanta's history of the clear connection between businesses and capitalism and the city's elite to its political leadership, and how those entities have really truly worked in tandem to create the conditions that currently exist in Atlanta.
The Atlanta Way.
The Atlanta Way. And it was really wild to learn more about Atlanta's police foundation. And we've talked on the podcast before about the problem that these police foundations are, and Atlanta's is a huge problem. So Mariah shares this, quote, "Police foundations have also enjoyed skyrocketing revenue since Black Lives Matter became a household phrase. The Atlanta Police Foundation, the primary entity behind Cop City, and the most well-endowed police foundation in the country, has seen a 15-fold increase in revenue since Trayvon was killed in 2012, and a 45% increase in revenue between 2018 and 2019, from $7.5 million to $10.8 million. Most of this funding comes from the philanthropic suites of high-profile corporations whose economic might is built on exploited labor." And to me right there, those numbers themselves are just staggering, right? Especially when you take into account the wealth inequality and the social conditions that exist in Atlanta and the way that it was sort of designed that way. But beyond that, one of the other things that Mariah shares in this essay that was kind of both chilling but really spot on was their analysis and work to connect all of this to fascism. And so Mariah says, quote, "In the words of George Jackson, fascism is, at its core, an economic arrangement. When workers refuse exploitation in mass and threaten the corporate bottom line, fascism attempts to renew the legitimacy of the economic elite by bearing down upon and diffusing unrest. If we are to clear the path to liberation of cop cities and other snares, movements must build on Atlanta's current experiments in undermining the economic arrangement of the police foundation as an institution." And I loved that. And, you know, I mentioned earlier that Stop Cop City is the movement itself sits at this intersection of multiple struggles. And so I appreciated Mariah's great work here to remind us of the role that fascism is also playing here as this sort of guide of that work.
Yeah, I think that the police foundations and policing in this country has been a form of fascism that we have not, as a country, accepted as fact. And so fascism has always been the thing that happens over there.
Yes.
And we've talked about it before here, too, that Jim Crow laws wouldn't have happened without a fascist kind of lens.
Yes.
And the ways that fascists were influenced and inspired by
There it is.
the United States' racial hierarchy and apartheid, as it came to be known in other places across the world. So there's a way that fascism has always influenced this.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a way that we're just seeing it in a slightly different light now.
Yeah.
In the wake of a lot of different, I think, public awakening around the issues.
Right. And I it would be so fascinating to know if someone has written about this, like the connection and the sort of coexistence of fascism and police foundations. Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, right.
Police foundations and policing and the individuals who are also present in white nationalist radical organizations that are propagating and promoting violence.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is also a real thing too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So continue on in chapter 4, which is called Becoming External Enemies, From Occupy Atlanta to Stop Cop City, which was written by Kayla Edgett. They highlight how solidarity becomes crystal clear to people. So She says, quote, when acts such as hanging flyers or attending a protest festival are criminalized, the state makes claims about who is in the movement that run counter to participants' understandings. In turn, those participants collectively construct an understanding of their subjectivation that crosses race and class boundaries. Middle-class families march in defense of poor trans youth sitting in jail charged with domestic terrorism. Local black militants decry the severe repression faced by those the state would like to paint as white outsiders. White activists give rides to black neighbors to protests and meetings. Crust punks cook meals for university students occupying their campuses. We all meet at a party to raise bail money for poor local residents who our comrades met in jail. These actions and other words and acts of solidarity reflect a re-articulation of the anarchist as criminal, the preschool teacher as Antifa, the clergy member as eco-extremist, and the criminal as comrade. As historian Salar Mohandesi argues, building this kind of articulated unity while accounting for material differences in experiences may be rare, but when it happens, the articulated unity substantially increases its capacity to realize transformational change.
Wow.
And I think that that's the analysis that normal people get. And that analysis creates these moments of mass mobilization.
Yes.
And so I believe as we're recording this is the anniversary of George Floyd's murder.
Yes.
And I think about that summer in the wake of his murder and how many people saw that happen and said, oh, that could have been me, even if most likely it would not have been them.
Right.
There's still a way that you see yourself in that moment. You see yourself in that violence reflected in that, in the same way that people showed up for their neighbors in ICE raids to stop ICE raids. And when ICE and CBP murdered Alex Preddy and Renee Good.
Yeah.
There's a way that people saw that and said, oh, that could have been me.
Yeah.
And in those moments, people see who gets criminalized, who gets marginalized, or who gets killed by the state. And that brings people out to action. And they want to say publicly that this is not acceptable.
Yeah, no more.
Because they see themselves in the person who was targeted.
Yeah.
In whatever way that was. And they can see the connections between their life and the person who was targeted, which gives them a stake. It makes that stake real.
Yeah.
And it makes people stand up to say no more.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you acknowledged George Floyd. I put something in our social this morning about it, and I shed a couple of tears for him today. And I think you're right. People saw themselves in that action. And I think sort of the way he cried out, I think, spoke to a lot of people.
Yeah.
But to your point about solidarity, this chapter was fascinating. I almost brought this chapter because I think you're right. The way that people see themselves and their ability to help one another, support one another, come together, it begins to crystallize this and helps them make sense of, oh, this is the work that's necessary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you see yourself. And so I'm not showing up to help somebody else.
Yeah.
I'm showing up because I know that I have to show up for me too.
Yes.
And there's that difference that is, I think, reflected in that quote that I'm paraphrasing now. But if you're here to help, I don't want it.
Yeah.
But if you're here because your liberation is bound up in mine, welcome.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the difference is when you see that and you say, oh, that could have been me, so I have to do something too. It changes the game.
Yeah.
And it changes your approach and your
action,
your worldview,
yeah.
and the way that you're doing all of it, it shifts. And so it's no longer about like, oh, this shouldn't happen because it's not good, which is valid.
Yeah, that's true.
But it shouldn't happen because it could also happen to me, and it's happening to people right now.
Yeah.
Like that changes. You see yourself in the people who it's happening to because you are ultimately of those people.
Absolutely. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for that. One of the essays that really stood out to me, and it's honestly because it was written by Angela Davis and Barbara Ransby.
Yeah.
It was called Atlanta's Attack on Protesters Should Be a Warning to Us All. And I think this is connected to what you were talking about a little bit too. This article actually, or this essay was actually originally published in Truth Out back in 2023. And I appreciated their essay for several reasons, specifically for highlighting how Stop Cop City the movement in Atlanta is connected to similar work in other cities, how the Stop Cop City movement is a central element of the greater movements for police abolition and racial justice and environmental justice, and what it has all meant for our work and the future of our work. And so part of what they say is this, quote, "The struggle in Atlanta is part of a bigger story, with corporations like Amazon, Wells Fargo, and Delta backing the Atlanta Police Foundation's development of this project. The direct link between the police state and encroaching environmental degradation becomes obvious. Moreover, Black and working class people are losing their lives to both at a record pace. And when brave community members and their supporters have stepped forward to defend the forest and object to a training ground designed to further perfect the use of state violence, they themselves have been systematically targeted." They then go on a little later to say, quote, "In our view, the money that it takes to build police training facilities would be better spent advancing deteriorating infrastructure. Atlanta has the highest income inequality in the nation, and more police won't fix that. Resources for healthcare, housing, and education could change the politically preordained circumstances that create such oppressive conditions. The call to stop Cop City is much bigger than just one facility. It is also connected to the years-long fight against the West Side Cop Academy in Chicago and against Urban Shield in Oakland. It is also directly linked to the uprisings in Ferguson and Baltimore and the massive response to the public execution of George Floyd." Mm-hmm. And I'm going to share one more thing. They close their brilliant essay by saying this, quote, "The movement for the abolition of police and prisons and the urgent and growing movement for environmental justice are two key pillars of a collective vision for a more hopeful, egalitarian future. The targeting of organizers in Atlanta seeks to send a dangerous and chilling message to the larger national and global movements. We must oppose this effort and support and defend the Atlanta organizers now being attacked, harassed, and persecuted for daring to speak truth to power and organize for a more just future." Mm-hmm. And for me, it was those ending words. They're everything there, right? We have to oppose this by any means necessary. And we have to support these organizers because, as you said, they're us, right? Mm-hmm. They are absolutely us.
Yeah, I think that essay was one of my favorites too.
Yeah.
I didn't look ahead to see what was coming.
Oh yeah.
I just was reading the book, going chapter by chapter,
right.
And then opened up that chapter and said, "Oh, Angela Davis and Barbara Ransby, this will be great."
And it was.
It was. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was chapter 8, which is called The Saboteurs. So I sort of talked about this a little bit earlier, or referenced it. This was written by Paul Torino. And Paul's making a clear argument about why the machine breaking and the acts of sabotage that some anonymous people took against the construction equipment is a valuable action that has its own logic.
Yeah.
He says, quote, "Those who engage in acts of sabotage are not irrational. They are community members acting according to their analysis of the situation, their specific proclivities as individuals, and a bit of intuitive sense. There are economic and political considerations for sabotage, and most or all saboteurs are aware of them in one way or another. Another way to say this is that there are direct, economic, as well as symbolic, political arguments to make about the timing and means of a specific attack or action." And this reminds me of when we learned more about the Luddites who broke machines back in the 19th century across England to protest the way that those machines were going to undercut people's livelihoods and ultimately people would lose jobs.
Right.
And we see similar arguments now about how breaking these construction machines or other equipment that was at the site is a specific form of economic and logistical disruption that is morally correct, even if it's considered illegal, because it's property destruction or vandalism, but it's in service of a movement to block an expansion of the police state that would ultimately bring harm to people and ecological harm to the largest forest in the Atlanta area, which would again bring harm to people and the environment and animals and all of the other things in the space. And so it's morally correct, but legally objectionable.
Sure.
And those things frequently don't align.
Yeah, but they coexist, right? And it also reminded me of the age-old argument about movements and protests and uprisings and when Targets are looted and stores are, and I'm like, I don't care. You know, people are angry, and this is the way that they are showing that, expressing it, and those corporations are fine. And in many ways, those corporations are upholding the issues that exist and are creating the conditions that exist for the people who live in those places and spaces. And so, yeah, that was another really great chapter as well.
Yeah, riot is the language of the unheard, as Dr. King said. So there's a way that it shows up in a variety of logical, specific, clear-headed arguments.
Yes.
That are hard to argue against.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense to me. All right. Well, all of this clearly is application. This entire book is, but let's formally move to the application portion of our show. So how does this book and our conversation about it apply to our everyday lives and work? I think there is countless pieces of wisdom in this book that could serve as application and motivation for the work that's necessary to stop Cop City here, abroad, everywhere. I want to highlight what the editors say to conclude the introduction of the book. They say, quote, "Finally, this book is an invitation to fight back against police repression and elite domination. The stakes could not be higher. Whether practicing civil disobedience, knocking on your neighbor's door, engaging in strategic sabotage, working in or out of the electoral process, organizing your workplace, or engaging in political education with your community, we need you. We need a true diversity of tactics, including the tactics we have not yet discovered. We invite you to join us in saying, no cop city, no cop world." And, first of all, I just appreciate the invitation there to join in and fight because that's important. But I also appreciate the warning about the stakes not being any higher than they are right now and how there is a role that all of us can play in this work and generally in the fight for social justice and collective liberation. And so how are we banded together? How are we fighting with our neighbors, loving on our neighbors? How are we engaging in our workplace? How are we, in figuring out what we need to do in the political space? Like where are the ways you can, as we say many times on the show, get in where you fit in? But we all have a role here and, we've got to do something. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, my application comes from the conclusion. I think it's connected to that. It's also about how the U.S. vision for policing is consistently exported through militarism. So connecting a little bit back to my internationalist argument earlier. And it's also grounded in the three evils that Dr. King talked about, which are racism, poverty, and militarism.
Yes.
So the piece I have from the conclusion is this, quote, "This vision for a world defined by extraction, exploitation, and domination, maintained through the violence of policing and militarism, is a fundamentally global one of Western hegemony. As sociologist Stuart Schrader has written, the U.S. is the global policeman, both exporting and importing techniques of police repression and violence. Some of the U.S.'s policing is highly visible. The U.S. regularly launches operations from its over 800 military bases around the world, engages in joint operations and missions, and exports massive amounts of arms. When we are the global policeman, it frequently means that those techniques practiced around the globe are coming home to roost."
Yes.
And I mentioned it earlier when we saw that Cop City looks a lot like a police and military training facility in Israel that gets used as a miniature Gaza for training operations. We see the reciprocal nature of this Western hegemony across the globe and the kind of hierarchy that the U.S. has maintained around the world through economic means, but also through just sheer might and military spending, just looking at how much money we spend on our military every year versus the next 8 countries combined, and those numbers being equal. That's a lot of money. And that's not counting the ways that policing gets funded.
Yes.
Which I believe, was it the NYPD? I think their budget would be one of the top, I want to say 20, it might be more than that, militaries in the world in terms of spending.
On its own, right?
On its own. And so that's a lot. That's a lot of money that we're spending on policing and on militarism. And I think when we think about budgets being moral documents, that reflects a specific kind of morals or lack thereof that Dr. King was talking about when he talked about the 3 evils that we're facing.
Yeah, well, and you got me there. They got me there with the 800 military bases around the world. Like, what in the world? So, you couple that with, you're right, all of the money that we're spending on the military and policing, right? And it shows who we are. right? And yet we have children without food and water. So, yeah, I love that application. Very good. All right, let's talk about homework. What do we want to do to continue our learning and unlearning work once we leave the table today? There are just a ton of incredible essays in this book. We only scratched the surface here. They were written by incredibly brilliant organizers, activists, scholars. And so part of what I want to do for homework is just to explore more of all of their work, because there's a lot more to learn from each and every one of them who is featured in this book. And then related/unrelated, I want to check out the 2025 book, Their End is Our Beginning, Cops, Capitalism, and Abolition by Brian Bean. It was listed on Haymarket's website when I pulled the intro last week. It's one of the related books to this one, and it sounds like it would be a fascinating read. So I'm going to probably add that to our list. What about you?
My homework is to read more from the Atlanta Community Press Collective, who wrote Chapter 3, which is called A Brief History of the Atlanta Prison Farm, which we learned a little bit about the Atlanta Prison Farm a couple years ago now from an article from The Bitter Southerner, which I think was also in this book.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Or one of the things that we read from that time period was in the book from The Bitter Southerner. So the Atlanta Community Press Collective described themselves as an abolitionist, not-for-profit media collective who has a goal to make the day-to-day workings of local government accessible to the public through explanatory reporting and to provide an investigative voice in a local media landscape increasingly dominated by corporate interests, which I think we need more of everywhere. And so I want to find ways to read more about what they're doing and how they're reporting on it, to see and hopefully learn more about what that looks like in different places around the country. Because with a lot of local newspapers collapsing over the last several decades, that kind of reporting is lacking in a lot of places. And so to see people stepping up into that void to make that reporting continue to happen, I think is important.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and I think Atlanta is a great place. This community press collective would be really great to learn from, just given what we learned in this book about Atlanta's main news outlet and the way that they are so biased, really, in terms of their reporting about the Stop Cop City movement and their support of the facility itself. And so I think they would be a really great organization to learn from. So I love that homework. All right, well, that's our conversation about this incredible book. I would encourage everyone to read it. It's a year old, but it is still very relevant. And as I said, there are so many brilliant folks featured in it to learn from. So check it out for yourselves. Aaron, you're up next time. What are you bringing to the table in our next episode?
I'm bringing the next article in the series from The Forge about corporate power.
Oh, okay.
It's called When Disaster Strikes, Housing Inequality and the Rising Threat of Disaster Capitalism. The description from the article is, quote, fueled by massive resources, corporate power is reshaping vast parts of our housing market, and with it, many of the neighborhoods that communities across the country have long called home. However, as our communities face more frequent once-in-a-generation climate events, corporate investors are also exploiting these disasters to acquire more of our homes. In this conversation, Iris Craig from Strategic Actions for a Just Economy and Audrey Aridanis from Miami Homes for All and Stella Adams from Blueprint, North Carolina, discuss the role of corporate power in housing and specifically after natural disasters.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to continuing to talk about this series right here on the show, because I think it's going to be a fascinating thing to continue to look at. And I'm only bringing one because it seemed, as I scanned it, seemed a little longer than the last two that we read. So I thought about bringing two because that's what you did, but I think that this has got enough in it.
Good,
so
I like that.
We'll see.
I'm glad you are picking up where I started us here with this great series from The Forge. So thank you for that. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
All right, folks, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what we want you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life, follow us on social media, including Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Check us out on YouTube and sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you so much for listening. Remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. And we'll talk to you next week.